The anonymous email landed in my inbox at 2:17 a.m. The subject line was just 2 words, St. Jude's. Inside there was no text, only a link. A link to a video that would detonate my life. It was raw, grainy security footage from the maternity ward of the very hospital where my husband Michael had supposedly mourned the loss of our stillborn son just 3 weeks earlier. But the video didn't show a grieving father. It showed a man I barely recognized, his face etched, not with sorrow, but with a chilling, frantic energy. And the woman he was, with her hand clutching his. That woman wasn't me. They say the truth sets you free. But as I watched that footage, all I felt was the cold, hard reality of a lie so monstrous it would unravel not just a marriage, but the very fabric of who I thought we were. My world, the one I had so meticulously curated, was painted in shades of beige and pottery barn. It was a world of scented candles, Sunday brunches, and the soft, cashmere-wrapped dream of impending motherhood. Michael and I were that couple, the ones whose Christmas cards made other people vaguely resentful. He was a successful architect, all sharp lines and even sharper suits, with a smile that could disarm a hostile boardroom. I was a freelance graphic designer, a profession that allowed me the flexibility to nest, to obsess over paint swatches for the nursery, and to scroll endlessly through baby name forums. Our life in our sprawling suburban home just outside of Austin, Texas, was a testament to shared ambition, and I thought shared love. We'd met in college, a whirlwind romance that had settled into the comfortable rhythm of a decade-long marriage. We'd weathered his demanding career, my brief but intense flirtation with opening a bakery, and the quiet, creeping anxiety of trying for a baby. When the 2 pink lines finally appeared on the pregnancy test, it felt less like a surprise and more like a hard-won victory. Michael had wept. He'd dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to my still flat stomach, whispering promises to our unborn child. He was an exemplary, expectant father. He assembled the crib with an engineer's precision, attended every Lamaze class, and learned to expertly massage my swollen ankles. He'd talk to my belly for hours, telling our son, whom we'd already named Caleb, about the world he was about to enter. The pregnancy was, for the most part, idyllic. I'd lean into the stereotype craving pickles and ice cream, and Michael would dutifully make midnight runs to the 24-hour grocery store. Our friends Mark and Sarah, who had 2 boisterous toddlers of their own, would watch us with a knowing, almost pitying fondness. "Just you wait," Mark would chuckle, ruffling Michael's hair. "Sleep now. You'll thank me later." The first fissure in our perfect world appeared so subtly, I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about a month before my due date. Michael called, his voice strained. "Sweetheart, I have to fly out to Chicago. A last-minute thing with the Harrison project. A major investor is threatening to pull out." Chicago now. I'd asked, a knot of disappointment tightening in my chest. We had a birthing class that evening. "I know, I'm so sorry, Amelia. I wouldn't go if it wasn't a 5-alarm fire. I'll be back Thursday, I promise. I love you. I love you both." He was so convincing, so genuinely apologetic, that I'd pushed my unease aside. It was his job. It was our future. But then, a few days after he was supposed to have returned, I was scrolling through Instagram. A girl I'd gone to college with, a bubbly blonde named Chloe Jenkins, who now worked in PR in Chicago, had posted a story. A picture of a crowded, trendy cocktail bar, the kind with Edison bulbs and artisanal gin, and there in the background, unmistakable even in the blurry periphery, was Michael. He was laughing, his head tilted back, a drink in his hand. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing a casual Henley, the one I always said brought out the blue in his eyes. And his arm was draped casually around the shoulders of a striking redhead I'd never seen before. My blood ran cold. I took a screenshot, my fingers trembling. When I confronted him, showing him the picture, he didn't even flinch. He looked at me with those earnest blue eyes and laughed. A short, dismissive sound. "Amy, sweetheart, you're seeing things. That's not even me." "Michael, I know what you look like. It's a blurry photo. It's some guy who looks like me." "And Chloe. You know, she's always been a bit of a drama queen. Probably just trying to stir something up." He pulled me into a hug, stroking my hair. "You're hormonal, baby. It's okay. I was in meetings the entire time. I was miserable. I missed you and Caleb every second." He was so good. So plausible. He showed me his expense reports, a string of Uber rides to a bland corporate office park, a dinner for one at a generic steakhouse. He had an answer for everything. I wanted to believe him. The alternative was a chasm I wasn't ready to face. So I let it go. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of the impending birth was making me irrational. I deleted the screenshot. I apologized. And I tucked the incident away in a dark corner of my mind, a place I refused to visit. 2 weeks later, I went into labor. It was premature, a full 3 weeks early, but the doctors at St. Jude's Medical Center weren't overly concerned. The contractions came hard and fast. Michael was by my side, a rock. He held my hand. He breathed with me. He whispered encouragement. He was the perfect husband, the perfect father-to-be. The hours blurred into a haze of pain and fear. There were complications. The baby's heart rate was dropping. The calm, reassuring voices of the nurses started to take on a sharper edge. The room filled with more people. I remember the anesthesiologist's kind eyes, the cold sting of the epidural. I remember the doctor, a woman with a stern but compassionate face, saying, "We need to get him out now." Then nothing. A black, empty void. I woke up in a quiet, dimly lit room. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors was gone. The bustling energy of the labor ward had been replaced by a heavy, oppressive stillness. Michael was slumped in a chair by my bed, his face buried in his hands. His shoulders were shaking. "Michael?" My voice was a dry, raspy whisper. He looked up, and his face broke me. It was a mask of utter devastation. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. Tears streamed down his cheeks unheeded. "He's gone, Amy." He choked out, his voice thick with a grief so profound it seemed to suck the air from the room. "Caleb, he didn't make it." The words didn't compute. They were just sounds, meaningless syllables that my brain refused to assemble into a coherent thought. I looked down at my body, at the flat expanse of my stomach beneath the thin hospital blanket. The life that had been there, the kicks and flutters that had become the rhythm of my days, was gone. The doctor came in and explained it in gentle clinical terms. Placental abruption, a rare catastrophic event. There was nothing anyone could have done. It was no one's fault. They were so sorry for my loss. The days that followed were a blur of unimaginable pain. I was a ghost, haunting the corridors of my own life. The nursery, once a room of joyful anticipation, became a mausoleum. Every tiny onesie, every perfectly folded blanket was a dagger to my heart. Michael was my shadow, my keeper. He handled everything. The hospital paperwork, the funeral arrangements, a small private service that I was too sedated to fully comprehend. He fielded the calls from concerned friends and family. He held me when I woke up screaming in the night. He seemed to be drowning in his own sea of grief. He lost weight. Dark circles appeared under his eyes. He'd sit for hours in the rocking chair in the nursery, just staring at the empty crib. He was the very picture of a bereaved father, and I clung to him. His grief was the only thing that validated my own. We were in this together, two shipwrecked survivors on a desolate shore. Our shared loss was the fragile raft that kept us afloat. I needed his pain to be as real as mine. It was the only thing that made sense in a world that had suddenly cruelly stopped making sense. The lie was perfect. It was seamless, comprehensive, and utterly devastatingly believable. He had built a fortress of sorrow around us, and I, his willing prisoner, had never once thought to check if the walls were real. The first 3 weeks after we lost Caleb were a suffocating fog. Time became a fluid, meaningless concept marked only by the rising and setting of the sun, which I mostly observed from the cocoon of my bed. Michael was my constant, my warden of grief. He brought me meals I didn't eat, coaxed me into showers I didn't want, and filled the silence with a steady stream of soothing, empty words. "We'll get through this, Amy. He'll always be our son. I love you so much." His performance was flawless. He never missed a beat. When my mother came to stay for a week, her own face a mirror of my sorrow, she'd watch Michael with tear-filled eyes. "You're a good man, Michael," she'd whispered to him in the kitchen one afternoon, a moment I overheard from the top of the stairs. "Thank God Amelia has you." He'd even begun to channel his grief into a project. He announced one evening, his voice heavy but resolute, that he was designing a memorial garden for the hospital, a place for parents like us. He'd said, his gaze distant, a place to remember the children we never got to hold. He'd spend hours at his drafting table, sketching intricate plans for fountains and benches and flower beds. It was all so noble, so heartbreakingly poignant. But grief is a strange and unpredictable beast. In its initial all-consuming phase, it blinds you. But as the raw, visceral agony begins to recede, even slightly, a new kind of clarity can emerge. Your senses, dulled by shock, slowly begin to sharpen. You start to notice things, small things, inconsistencies. The first crack was small, almost imperceptible. It was a bill, an itemized statement from the hospital. I'd found it in the mail which Michael had taken to sorting through before I saw it, to protect you from any unnecessary stress, he'd said. This one had apparently slipped through his filtration system. I scanned the list of charges, a morbid curiosity compelling me to relive the trauma in black and white. Anesthesia, operating room fees, pharmacy. And then a line item that made me pause. NICU, level 3 care, 3 days. NICU, neonatal intensive care unit. I frowned. Why would Caleb have been in the NICU? The doctor had been clear. It was a stillbirth. He was gone before he was born. There was no care, intensive or otherwise. I assumed it was a clerical error, a common enough occurrence in the bureaucratic labyrinth of healthcare. But the detail lodged itself in my mind, a tiny burr under the skin. The second crack appeared a few days later. Sarah, my best friend, came over bearing a casserole and a bottle of wine she knew I wouldn't drink. She sat with me on the couch, letting the silence hang comfortably between us, before she finally spoke. "How are you really?" she asked, her voice gentle. I gave her my standard, non-committal answer. "Getting by." She nodded, her eyes full of a sympathy, that for the first time felt a little off. There was something else there, a hesitation, a flicker of pity. No, that wasn't it. It was something closer to discomfort. "Amy," she began, choosing her words carefully. "When Michael called us from the hospital, he was a wreck. Mark and we wanted to come right away, but Michael was so insistent. He said you didn't want to see anyone, that you needed space." "I did," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I couldn't face anyone." "I get that," she said quickly. "Of course I do." But he said something else. Something odd. I waited, my body tensing. "He said that they had Caleb on life support," she said, her brow furrowed in confusion. "He said you were both just waiting, making a decision. He was asking Mark about what that was like to let go." The casserole on my lap suddenly felt like a lead weight. Life support. A decision. This was a narrative I hadn't heard, a version of the story that diverged wildly from the one I had been told. "He must have been confused," I said the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "He was in shock. We all were." "Of course," Sarah said immediately, backing down, sensing my distress. "That must be it. Oh, Amy, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have even brought it up. It stuck with me." But it stuck with me, too. It joined the NICU charge, another piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was solving. That night I couldn't sleep. The image of Michael on the phone with Mark, fabricating a story about our son on life support, played on a loop in my head. Why? Why would he lie about something so specific, so sacred? Was his grief so profound it had created false memories? Or was it something else? The memory of the Instagram photo from Chicago, the one I had so willingly dismissed, resurfaced with a vengeance. The laughing man with his arm around the redhead. "You're hormonal, baby. It's some guy who looks like me." My hands started to tremble. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Michael, who was sleeping soundly, a picture of peaceful exhaustion. I tiptoed into his home office, the room where he was designing his memorial garden, a sanctuary of his supposed sorrow. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silent house. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I had to look. His laptop was closed on his desk. I opened it. It was password protected, of course. I tried our anniversary. Nothing. I tried my birthday. Nothing. I tried Caleb. The screen unlocked. A wave of nausea washed over me, using our dead son's name as a password. The thought was both sickening and, in a twisted way, perfectly in character with the grieving father he was pretending to be. His email was already open. I felt a pang of guilt, a lifetime of respecting his privacy, warring with the gnawing suspicion that was now consuming me. I clicked on his sent folder. There were emails to contractors about the memorial garden, emails to his colleagues, thanking them for their condolences. And then I saw it. A thread of emails with a woman named Jenna. Jenna Reed. My breath hitched. The redhead from the Instagram photo. The emails went back months. They started professionally enough, something about a joint project between his firm and hers in Chicago. But the tone quickly shifted. They became familiar, flirty, intimate. They talked about meeting for drinks for dinner. They talked about her recent divorce. They talked about how alive he felt when he was with her. I scrolled down, my vision blurring with tears. The dates were a brutal chronological indictment. There was an email from the day he'd supposedly flown to Chicago, for his 5-alarm fire meeting. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: on my way, wheels up. Can't wait to see you. Counting the minutes. Ditch the boring conference dinner tonight. I found a place I think you'll love. And then I found the emails from the week Caleb had died. He'd been emailing her from the hospital, while I was in labor, while I was in surgery, while I was lying in a drugged haze, believing he was by my side, drowning in grief. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: it's happening. Amelia's in labor. It's early. This is it. Talk soon. Then a few hours later. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: it's happening. It's a nightmare here. Complications. Don't know what's going on. I'll call you when I can. And then the email that made me physically recoil, a gasp escaping my lips. It was sent the morning after I'd been told our son was gone. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: I need you. It's over. He didn't make it. It's for the best. I know we talked about this, the timing. It would have been impossible, but God, Jenna, it's still... I can't explain it. She's a mess. I have to be the strong one here. I have to play the part. But all I can think about is you. All I want is to be with you. This whole thing, it just makes me realize I can't live this lie anymore. As soon as I can, I'm coming to you. It's for the best. The timing. It would have been impossible. I have to play the part. The words swam before my eyes. The fortress he had built crumbled around me, and I saw the lie for what it was. It wasn't about shared grief. It was about an affair. It was about an exit strategy. The death of our son wasn't a tragedy he was enduring with me. It was a complication he was managing. A messy, loose end he needed to tie up so he could move on to his new life, his new woman. The NICU charge. The story about life support to Sarah and Mark. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. These weren't the ramblings of a grief-stricken mind. They were lies. Scaffolding to support a bigger, more monstrous lie. He needed a story that was dramatic, that required his constant attention, that isolated me, and made him the heroic, grieving husband. A story that bought him time. My grief, which had been a raw, open wound, was suddenly eclipsed by a rage so white-hot, it was almost dizzying. The man sleeping in my bed, the man whose tears I had wiped away, the man whose hand I had clung to, as if it were a lifeline, was a stranger, a monster. I closed the laptop, my movements stiff and robotic. I walked out of the office and back into our bedroom. I stood by the bed, looking down at his sleeping face. He looked so peaceful, so innocent, and I felt a chilling, terrifying calm settle over me. The fog had lifted, and in its place was a cold, hard certainty. I didn't know what the full truth was, but I was going to find out. And I was going to burn his world to the ground. It was in this state of cold fury in the dead of night, fueled by betrayal and a desperate need for irrefutable proof, that I did something I never would have imagined myself capable of. I thought about the hospital, St. Jude's, a place of immense pain, but also a place with answers. I thought about the inconsistencies, the lies. And I thought about the one thing that doesn't lie. Cameras. I sent an anonymous email to a local investigative journalist, a woman named Isabella Rossi, whose work I'd followed, known for her tenacity in uncovering institutional malfeasance. And then I sent another one from a different burner account to a victims' rights group that specialized in medical negligence. I didn't know what would come of it, but I had planted a seed. I had lit a match. Now all I could do was wait for the explosion. It came a week later in the form of that 2:17 a.m. email. The one with the subject line, St. Jude's. The one with the link that would change everything. I clicked it, and my world went from a nightmare into a living hell. The video player loaded a stark white box against the dark screen of my laptop. There was no sound, just the silent, unblinking eye of a security camera. The timestamp in the corner read 8:14 p.m. on the day Caleb died. The angle was from high in a corner, looking down on a section of a hospital corridor. It was unmistakably St. Jude's. The same pale green walls, the same polished linoleum floors I had stared at in a daze. The sign on the wall was blurry, but I could make out the letters NICU. My heart hammered against my ribs. This is it. A nurse in blue scrubs walked briskly past the camera. A doctor followed a moment later. Then from the left of the frame, Michael appeared. My Michael. He was wearing the same dark grey sweater I'd laid out for him that morning. But the man on the screen was not the devastated husband-to-be I remembered. His posture was rigid, his movements jerky and agitated. He was pacing, running a hand through his hair, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked trapped, cornered. He stopped pacing and leaned against the wall directly under the camera. He was talking animatedly, his free hand gesturing in frustration. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the panic in his body language. This was not a man waiting for news about his laboring wife. This was a man trying to control a situation that was spiraling out of his grasp. Then from the right of the frame she appeared. Jenna Reed. The redhead from the Instagram photo, the name in the emails. In the flesh. She was wearing a chic black coat, looking utterly out of place in the sterile hospital environment. She walked directly to Michael, her face a mixture of concern and impatience. I watched my breath caught in my throat as she reached him. She put a hand on his arm. He immediately flinched, pulling away, shaking his head and glancing nervously down the hallway in the direction of my delivery room. He said something to her, his expression hard and dismissive. She recoiled, her own face hardening. They began to argue, a silent, frantic pantomime of rage and recrimination. She jabbed a finger at his chest. He grabbed her wrist. She tried to pull away. It was ugly, vicious, a scene not of shared comfort, but of a clandestine meeting gone horribly wrong. This wasn't a friend offering support. This was a confrontation. And then the most damning moment of all. A doctor, the same stern-faced woman who had delivered the news of Caleb's death to me, walked towards them from the direction of the NICU. She had a clipboard in her hand. She approached Michael, her expression grave. Michael's entire demeanor shifted. The anger vanished, replaced instantly by a mask of gut-wrenching sorrow. He physically crumpled, leaning his head against the wall, covering his face with his hands. It was a performance, a switch flipped. Jenna stood by her arms crossed, watching him with a look of cold, calculating assessment. The doctor spoke to Michael for a few moments, her hand on his shoulder in a gesture of compassion. She pointed back towards the NICU. Michael shook his head vehemently. The doctor spoke again, her expression turning from sympathy to something more insistent. She seemed to be urging him towards the unit. He refused again, more forcefully this time, waving a hand dismissively. He said something that made the doctor's eyes widen in disbelief. Then she simply nodded, a look of profound sadness and perhaps a touch of disgust on her face, and walked away. Once the doctor was gone, Michael straightened up. The mask of grief fell away as quickly as it had appeared. He turned back to Jenna, his face a snarl of pure fury. He grabbed her by the arm and pulled her roughly down the corridor, away from the NICU, away from my room and out of the camera's frame. The video ended. I stared at the blank screen, the silence of the room roaring in my ears. The pieces didn't just fall into place. They slammed together with the force of a car crash. Caleb had been in the NICU. The bill was not a mistake. Sarah had not misheard. My son had been born alive. He had been alive, and he had been fighting for his life in a glass box just down the hall, and my husband, his father, had been in the corridor arguing with his mistress. The doctor had tried to bring him to his son. She was urging him towards the unit, and he had refused. The lie was so much more monstrous than I could ever have conceived. He hadn't just lied about an affair. He hadn't just lied about the timing of Caleb's death to make his getaway easier. He had lied about our son's entire existence. He had let me believe our child was stillborn, a silent, painless tragedy, when in reality Caleb had lived. He had breathed, and he had died alone without his mother while his father refused to even go see him. Why? The answer was right there in the video, in the cold, hard expression on Jenna Reed's face, in the frantic, trapped energy of my husband, a living, breathing baby, a premature baby who would require months of intensive care and a lifetime of devotion that was not part of their plan. It was the ultimate complication. A stillbirth was a tragedy you could mourn and move on from. A critically ill child was an anchor, a lifelong responsibility that would have chained Michael to me forever. So he made a choice. He chose his affair over his son. He rewrote the narrative. He turned our son's fight for life into a story of instantaneous death. He curated my grief, managed my reality, to fit his sordid escape plan. The rage that had been simmering inside me erupted into a volcanic inferno. It was a physical force, so powerful I thought it would tear me apart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to destroy something. I wanted to walk into the bedroom and wake him up, not with words, but with my bare hands. But then a different instinct took over, a cold, chilling calm. The same calm I'd felt when I'd decided to look at his laptop. This wasn't a private matter anymore. This wasn't a marital dispute to be settled with screaming matches and thrown pottery. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had committed an act of unimaginable cruelty against his own child. He had defrauded a hospital. He had lied to doctors. And he had enlisted his mistress as a co-conspirator. The leaked footage wasn't just my personal vindication. It was evidence. I forwarded the email with the video link to Isabella Rossi, the investigative journalist. My note was simple. This is security footage from St. Jude's Medical Center on the night of May 12th. The man in the video is Michael Davenport, a prominent Austin architect. He told his wife their son was stillborn. As you can see, that was a lie. Look into the NICU records. Look into Jenna Reed of Reed PR in Chicago. Look into the memorial garden he is currently fundraising for. He didn't just have an affair. He let his son die alone to save it. And then I forwarded it to the police. The story broke 2 days later. It wasn't just a local story. It went national. Isabella Rossi's article was a masterpiece of controlled fury, laying out the facts in stark, brutal detail. "The architect of a monstrous lie," the headline screamed. The article included stills from the security footage, Michael's face contorted in anger or Jenna's cold and watchful. It detailed the timeline, The emails, the hospital bill, the confirmation from anonymous sources at St. Jude's that baby boy Davenport had indeed spent 72 hours in the NICU before succumbing to complications of his premature birth. They had tried repeatedly to get the father to come and see the child to authorize certain procedures, but he had been unreachable or unwilling to engage. The public response was instantaneous and savage. The story was a perfect storm of infidelity, betrayal, and the ultimate parental sin. Michael became a villain of almost cartoonish proportions overnight. His face was everywhere, on cable news, on tabloid websites, on social media feeds. The name Michael Davenport became synonymous with narcissistic cruelty. His firm fired him, issuing a public statement denouncing his deplorable and unethical personal conduct. The fundraising page for the memorial garden was taken down, but not before screenshots circulated online, a testament to his staggering hypocrisy. People found his social media, his firm's page, my own long-dormant accounts. The comments were a torrent of hatred. Monster. Psychopath. I hope he rots in hell. Jenna Reed was not spared. Her PR firm's website was flooded with one-star reviews. Her professional headshot was juxtaposed with the grainy security footage, still of her watching Michael's fake breakdown. She was branded the home-wrecking ghoul. Her career was incinerated in a matter of hours. I watched it all unfold from the guest room of Mark and Sarah's house. I had packed a single bag the morning after I saw the video and left before Michael woke up. I left my wedding ring on the pillow next to his head. I didn't leave a note. The entire world was about to leave him a note. My own role in the story was that of the tragic victim. The media painted me as the poor, grieving mother doubly betrayed by her monstrous husband. My photo, a smiling, pregnant shot from my Instagram, was splashed everywhere. I received an outpouring of sympathy from strangers around the world. It was surreal and strangely numbing. Their pity felt as distant and impersonal as their rage towards Michael. The only thing that felt real was the new agonizing truth about my son. Caleb. He had lived. He had a birth date and a death date. He had been a person in the world, however briefly. And this new knowledge brought with it a new kind of grief. It was sharper, more defined. I wasn't just mourning the loss of a dream anymore. I was mourning a real boy, a boy whose father had discarded him like a piece of trash. A few days after the story broke, Michael was arrested. The charge wasn't murder or anything as dramatic as the online mob wanted. It was fraud. He had knowingly provided false information to the hospital, leading them to misclassify the death and issue an incorrect death certificate. There were also questions about medical decisions that were delayed or not made because of his refusal to engage. It was a messy, complex legal situation, but for now, the fraud charge was enough to hold him. I saw his mugshot online. The handsome, charming architect was gone. In his place was a hollow-eyed, unshaven man with a haunted, terrified expression. He looked broken, but I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just a vast, cold emptiness. The unveiling was complete. The perfect life, the perfect husband, the perfect grief, it had all been a lie. And now the truth in all its ugly, brutal glory was out for the world to see. I had gotten the truth. I had gotten my revenge. But as I sat in that quiet guest room, surrounded by the wreckage of my life, I had to face the terrifying question of what came next. The world loves a good villain, and Michael Davenport was tailor-made for the role. The media frenzy was relentless, a piranha-like swarm that stripped every detail of our lives down to the bone. Our wedding photos holiday, snaps my baby shower pictures. They were all repurposed as exhibits in the public trial of my husband. Each smiling image was now imbued with a sinister irony. Look at the happy couple just months before he let their baby die. I remained sequestered at Mark and Sarah's, a voluntary prisoner in their suburban guest room. They were magnificent, acting as gatekeepers against the world. They fielded calls from reporters, deflected nosy neighbors, and kept me supplied with tea and tissues. Sarah would sit with me for hours, not pressing me to talk, just offering a solid, comforting presence against the tsunami of chaos. My grief for Caleb had transformed. The murky, undefined sorrow of losing a stillborn child was replaced by the sharp, specific agony of mourning a son I never knew. I requested the full medical records from St. Jude's. They arrived in a thick manila envelope, and I read them with a forensic intensity. I learned his weight, 3 pounds, 2 ounces. His length, 15 inches. I read the nurse's notes, their neat professional script detailing his every struggle. Infant exhibiting respiratory distress. Apnea episodes increasing in frequency. Attempts to contact father unsuccessful. These clinical details were both torture and a strange kind of solace. They made him real. He wasn't just a phantom kick in my belly. He was a tiny person who had fought. The knowledge was a knife in my heart, but it was a real knife, not the phantom pain I'd been living with. I was no longer grieving a possibility. I was grieving a person. And with that came a new, focused anger. Not just at Michael, but at myself. How had I not known? How could a mother not feel on some primal cellular level that her child was alive? The guilt was a heavy cloak suffocating me. Michael denied bail due to being a flight risk, and the sheer public outrage languished in county jail. His high-powered family in Connecticut hired a top-tier legal team led by a shark of a defense attorney named Marcus Thorne, who immediately went on the offensive. Thorne's strategy was clear paint Michael not as a monster, but as a man who had suffered a profound psychological break. Mr. Davenport was under unimaginable stress. Thorne declared on the courthouse steps, his voice oozing sincerity. The impending birth, the pressures of his career, and a marriage that was already quietly fracturing led to a dissociative episode. He created a false narrative, not out of malice, but because his mind simply could not cope with the reality of his son's critical condition. This is not a case of fraud. It's a case of profound mental trauma. It was a brilliant, insidious defense. It attempted to reclaim the narrative of grief that Michael himself had so expertly woven. I watched the press conference on TV, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. A psychological break. He hadn't had a break. He'd had a plan. The emails to Jenna were proof of that. Speaking of Jenna, she had vanished. Her social media was deleted, her firm's website was offline, and her office was shuttered. The press couldn't find her. But the police did. She was located in a luxury spa resort in Arizona, having fled Chicago the day the story broke. They brought her back to Austin for questioning. She was not charged with a crime, she had broken no laws, but she was a material witness, and facing the ruin of her career and the full force of public condemnation, she decided to save herself. She made a deal with the prosecutors for immunity in exchange for her testimony. Her deposition was leaked to the press, of course. Every sordid detail. She recounted how she and Michael had met, the thrill of their affair, their shared fantasy of a future together. And then she came to the part about the baby. According to Jenna, the pregnancy had been a crisis point. Michael had assured her he would leave me, but the baby complicated everything. Her version of events painted Michael as weak and indecisive a man, panicking as his carefully compartmentalized life began to converge. He told me the baby would trap him, her deposition read. He said that if the baby was born healthy, he'd never be able to leave. The guilt would be too much, the societal pressure too great. We were in the hotel in Chicago when Amelia went into labor. He was a mess. He kept saying, "This is a disaster. This ruins everything." The most chilling part of her testimony concerned the hours at the hospital. She admitted to going there to confront him, to demand he make a choice. And she described the moment he learned Caleb was alive, but critically ill. He came out of the delivery area, and his face was white, she stated. He said, "It's alive, but it's sick. They don't think it's going to make it." And then he looked at me, and I saw a look in his eye. It was cold, calculating. He said, this could be a way out, a clean break. He decided right then and there. He told me the plan he would tell Amelia the baby was stillborn. He said it would be kinder that way. A quick, tragic end, instead of weeks or months of false hope. He said it would let them grieve together, and then, when the time was right, they could go their separate ways. He said it was the only way to manage the situation without destroying everyone. Kinder. He had called this monstrous selfish deception an act of kindness. He had appointed himself the arbiter of my grief, the editor of my reality, to facilitate his escape into a new life. Jenna's testimony destroyed Marcus Thorne's psychological break defense. This wasn't a man unmoored from reality. This was a man executing a premeditated, cold-blooded plan. The fallout from Jenna's deposition was a second explosion ripping through what little was left of our social circle. People were forced to take sides. My side was easy, the wronged wife, the grieving mother. His was impossible. His friends, his colleagues, even some of his family publicly disavowed him. He was utterly alone. One evening, Mark came into the guest room, a grim look on his face. "You got a letter," he said, holding it out as if it were contaminated. "From him. It was sent here from his lawyer." I took it from him, my hand steady. I hadn't heard a single word from Michael since I'd left. No calls, no texts, no emails. Just the public pronouncements of his lawyer. I slit the envelope open. The letter was written on a piece of yellow legal paper, his familiar architectural script looking alien and obscene. "Amelia, I know you will never forgive me. I don't expect you to. I don't forgive myself. Listening to Thorne talk in court, listening to what Jenna said, it's like hearing about a stranger, a monster. I don't know who that man was. The pressure, the lies, it all just avalanched. I was suffocating and I made a choice, a terrible, unforgivable choice. I see his face now, Amy. The nurses at St. Jude's, they showed me a picture. After it was over. I wouldn't look at the time. I refused. But they put a photograph in my discharge file. I found it when I was looking for paperwork for Thorne. I've been looking at it every night here in my cell. He looked like you. He had your nose. I destroyed everything. I destroyed you. I destroyed our son. I destroyed myself. I know sorry is a pathetic, meaningless word. It's an insult. But it's the only one I have. Don't let this destroy you. Please. You are a good person. You deserved a good life, a good husband. You deserved to be Caleb's mother. And I stole that from you. Michael. I read the letter twice. There was no rage left in me. No fire. just a profound, bone-deep weariness. His apology, his self-pity, his supposed realization, it was all too little too late. It was the pathetic whimper of a man who had been caught. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry for the consequences. He looked like you. He had your nose. The words were meant to be a bridge, a shared detail of our son. But all it did was highlight the chasm between us. He had a photograph, a picture of our son's face. And he had kept that from me, too. Another secret, another layer of his betrayal. I folded the letter neatly. I did not rip it up. I did not burn it. I placed it in the manila envelope with Caleb's medical records. It was just one more piece of evidence in the case file of my shattered life. The unraveling was almost complete. The lies had all been exposed. The villain had been caged, and the truth was a harsh, unforgiving glare. All that was left was the trial, and the daunting task of figuring out how to live in the scorched earth he had left behind. The trial of Michael Davenport was a spectacle. It felt less like a legal proceeding and more like the final act of a grim, nationally televised play. I was there for every moment, a silent, black-clad figure in the front row. I refused to let the media's portrayal of me as a fragile, broken victim define me. I needed to bear witness. I owed it to Caleb. Michael, clad in an ill-fitting suit, looked like a ghost. The charm and confidence that had once been his armor were gone, replaced by a hollowed-out resignation. He rarely looked at me. When our eyes did meet across the courtroom, his were filled with a desperate, pleading shame. I felt nothing. It was like looking at a stranger. The prosecution, armed with the security footage, the emails and Jenna Reed's damning testimony, laid out their case with brutal efficiency. They painted a picture of a cold, narcissistic man who viewed his own child as a complication to be managed. They called nurses from St. Jude's to the stand who testified through tears about baby boy Davenport's fight for life and their frustrating, futile attempts to get his father involved. He told me on the phone, "There's no point in me coming down there. It's a foregone conclusion." One veteran NICU nurse testified, her voice thick with contempt. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen parents in denial, in shock, in every state of grief imaginable. I have never, ever seen a parent so indifferent." The defense, hamstrung by Jenna's testimony, did their best to salvage the psychological break narrative, but it rang hollow. Marcus Thorne put a psychiatrist on the stand who spoke of narcissistic personality disorder and acute stress reactions. But under cross-examination, even he had to admit that Michael's actions, the meticulous lies, the cover-up, the manipulation of me demonstrated a high degree of planning and cognitive function, not a break from reality. The moment that will forever be seared into my memory was when the prosecution introduced the photograph of Caleb into evidence, the one Michael had mentioned in his letter. They had retrieved it from his files. An evidence technician projected it onto the large screens in the courtroom. And there he was, my son. He was so tiny, nestled in a tangle of wires and tubes. His skin was translucent, his eyes were closed, and his tiny chest was still. But he was beautiful. He was perfect. He had my nose, and a shock of dark hair, just like Michael's. A sound escaped my lips, a raw, guttural sob that I couldn't contain. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with whispers, fell utterly silent. In that moment, he was not baby boy Davenport, the tragic figure in a news story. He was Caleb, my Caleb, and the world was finally seeing him. I saw Michael crumple at the defendant's table, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. For the first time, his grief looked real. But it was a selfish grief. Grief for himself, for the life he'd lost, the man he'd failed to be. It had nothing to do with the tiny boy on the screen. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The verdict was guilty. Guilty of felony fraud. Guilty of reckless endangerment. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman, delivered the sentence a week later. She spoke directly to Michael, her voice dripping with scorn. "You did not just lie, Mr. Davenport," she said, her eyes boring into him. "You constructed an alternate reality of unimaginable cruelty. You weaponized your wife's grief and love for you to cover your own pathetic infidelities. You treated the life and death of your own son as an inconvenience to be managed. Your crime is not just against the state or the hospital. It is a crime against humanity, against the very definition of fatherhood. It is one of the most profound acts of narcissistic cruelty I have ever witnessed from this bench." She sentenced him to the maximum possible term, 10 years in state prison. A gasp went through the courtroom. 10 years. It was a harsh sentence for fraud, but it was clear the judge was sentencing the moral crime, not just the legal one. I walked out of the courthouse into a sea of cameras and reporters. I didn't stop. I just kept walking, Mark and Sarah flanking me like bodyguards. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt quiet. The noise that had been roaring in my head for months had finally subsided. It was over. The weeks and months that followed were a slow, painful process of rebuilding. I sold the house, the one with the beige walls and the nursery that had become a mausoleum. I couldn't bear to be in it another second. I took my half of the assets and moved into a small, bright apartment in a different part of Austin, a part of the city that held no memories of him. I legally changed my last name back to my maiden name, Amelia Shelton. It was a small act, but a significant one. I was no longer Amelia Davenport. That woman, the one who believed in the Pottery Barn fantasy, was gone. She had died with Caleb. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma and grief. We talked about Caleb. We talked about Michael. We talked about the complex, tangled knot of my own guilt and rage. She helped me understand that I couldn't have known that I was the victim of a master manipulator, and that my body and mind, under the trauma of childbirth and what I believed was catastrophic loss, had been in survival mode. I never spoke to Michael again. His lawyers reached out regarding the divorce proceedings, which were swift and uncontested. He signed everything, gave me everything I asked for. It was his final futile act of penance. I heard through the grapevine that Jenna Reed had moved to another state, changed her name, and was attempting to start over forever, branded by her association with the case. I found I didn't have the energy to hate her. She was just another piece of wreckage in the blast zone of Michael's lies. My life now is quiet. It is small. I still work as a graphic designer, but I find my greatest solace in volunteering at a local animal shelter. The uncomplicated, unconditional affection of the abandoned dogs and cats is a balm to my soul. I have a framed copy of Caleb's photograph on my nightstand. It's the only picture I have of him, the one from the courtroom. I look at it every day. I tell him good morning and I tell him good night. I tell him about my day. I tell him that I love him. I am in my own quiet way, finally getting to be his mother. The grief for him will never go away. It has become a part of me, a shadow that walks beside me. but it is no longer an all-consuming darkness. Sometimes it is even a source of strength. It reminds me of what is real, of what is important. It reminds me of the devastating cost of lies. I don't know if I will ever trust anyone fully again. I don't know if I will ever remarry or have more children. The future is not a bright, shining path anymore. It is a quiet, winding road, and I am taking it one step at a time. I have survived the unimaginable. I have walked through the fire of the ugliest of truths and come out on the other side. I am scarred. I am changed. But I am still here. And in the quiet of my new life, for the first time in a very long time, that feels like enough. The story of Amelia and Michael is a harrowing reminder that sometimes the most devastating monsters are the ones sleeping right beside us, hidden behind a mask of love and concern. It's a story about the corrosive power of lies and the unimaginable depths of betrayal. But it's also a story of survival of a woman who walked through an inferno of public humiliation and private agony to reclaim her own truth and find a way to honor the son who was stolen from her twice. If this story touched you, if it made you think, if it made you feel, please take a moment to hit that like button to help us share it with more people. More importantly, leave a comment below.
Welcome to the story at a luxury restaurant. A millionaire sees his pregnant ex-wife while out to dinner with her new girlfriend. But he is very shocked. The chance encounter leads to unexpected revelations that will leave you speechless. As the evening begins, the millionaire is enjoying a quiet dinner with his new partner, soaking in the ambiance of a luxurious restaurant. Little does he know, the night is about to take a dramatic turn. Suddenly, he spots his ex-wife across the room, visibly pregnant. The sight stirs a whirlwind of memories and emotions, prompting an internal struggle between his past and present. The millionaire's girlfriend quickly senses the tension in the air. She becomes an unwilling participant in an unfolding drama that tests the strength of their bond. Meanwhile, the ex-wife's presence and her condition raise questions about their past and the implications for their future. This emotional encounter opens a dialogue about forgiveness, responsibility, and the possibility of second chances. Inform us if you are enthusiastic about this narrative. If you are, press 1 if you found the video to be enjoyable. If this is not the case, press 0. Your comments are a great source of motivation for me to collect more stories that are uplifting and meaningful.
The golden glow of the city lights reflected off the sleek glass windows of the limousine as it pulled up to Amaretto, the newest and most exclusive restaurant in town. Lincoln Davis adjusted his cufflinks, the subtle flash of his platinum watch catching the soft interior light. Beside him, Ruth sat poised and elegant, her sequin dress sparkling with every turn of her wrist. She was everything the evening demanded, polished, glamorous, and exuding the same air of affluence that surrounded him. "Do you think they'll have truffle risotto?" Ruth asked, her tone casual but tinged with excitement. "I've been craving it all week." Lincoln smiled and nodded. "If they don't, I'll make sure they do. Tonight's about celebrating. Nothing's off the table." The restaurant was the perfect backdrop for their evening, a modern masterpiece with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the skyline. The maitre d' greeted them with a wide smile, ushering them toward a table draped in crisp white linens. The room hummed with quiet sophistication, every detail meticulously arranged to exude exclusivity. Ruth leaned in as they sat. "This place is incredible. You always know how to pick them." Lincoln allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Tonight wasn't just about the product launch. It was about reminding himself, and everyone else, that he was at the top of his game. Success, after all, was best celebrated with the right company and an impeccable setting. As they scanned the menus, Lincoln caught a glimpse of a server moving toward their table. He barely registered her at first, just another uniformed staff member weaving through the polished crowd, but something about her gait pulled his attention. When she stepped closer, his breath caught. Harper. Her hair, once so familiar, was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her uniform, a black blouse and apron, was far removed from the elegant dresses she used to wear. But it was her face, framed by the same soft features he once traced with his fingers, that sent his thoughts tumbling. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed by long days and restless nights, but there was a glow about her. It took him a moment to realize why. She was pregnant. Lincoln's heart lurched, a cascade of emotions hitting him all at once: shock, guilt, and a sharp pang of something he couldn't quite name. The woman who had once been his world was now standing before him, carrying a life he knew nothing about. "Good evening," Harper said, her voice calm and professional. "Can I get you started with some drinks?" Ruth, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension crackling between them, smiled brightly. "I'll have a glass of your best Chardonnay." "Lincoln?" Lincoln struggled to find his voice, his mind racing to reconcile the woman in front of him with the memories he'd tried so hard to bury. Finally, he managed, "Water for now." "Sparkling." Harper nodded, her expression giving nothing away, and jotted the orders down on her notepad. For a fleeting moment, her eyes met his, and he thought he saw a flicker of something: resentment? Sadness? Before she quickly looked away. "I'll be right back," she said, turning on her heel and disappearing into the sea of diners. Lincoln stared after her, his appetite suddenly gone. He could still hear her voice, softer now, tangled with the echoes of their past late-night talks, whispered dreams, and arguments that had grown louder with each passing year. He had told himself that their divorce was inevitable, that their lives were moving in different directions. Yet seeing her now, with a baby on the way, he couldn't help but feel he had missed something crucial. Ruth's voice broke through his thoughts. "Earth to Lincoln?" He blinked, realizing she was looking at him expectantly. "Sorry." "What were you saying?" "I was asking if you're okay. You've been staring off into space since we got here." She tilted her head, her expression laced with concern. "Something wrong?" "No," he said too quickly, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about work. It's been a long week." Ruth's eyes narrowed, but she let it go, returning her attention to the menu. Lincoln, however, couldn't stop the images flooding his mind: Harper smiling at him across their old kitchen table, laughing as they danced in the rain during their honeymoon, her tears the night they finally admitted they couldn't make it work. When Harper returned with their drinks, she placed them on the table with practiced efficiency. "Are you ready to order?" Ruth rattled off her choice, but Lincoln hesitated. His eyes flicked to Harper's face, searching for a sign, a cue, anything to anchor him in this moment. Finally, he gave his order, his voice quieter than usual. As Harper scribbled it down, Ruth leaned forward, her voice warm but curious. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" For the first time that evening, Harper hesitated. She glanced at Lincoln, a subtle question in her eyes, before shaking her head. "I don't think so. I just started working here a few months ago." Lincoln felt his throat tighten. The idea of Harper, a woman who once managed marketing campaigns for global brands, waiting tables, was almost too much to process. Yet she carried herself with the same quiet dignity he remembered, her head held high despite the circumstances. When she walked away again, Ruth turned to him, her brow furrowed. "Is it just me, or was that a little weird?" Lincoln forced a laugh. "You're imagining things. Let's focus on tonight, okay?" But even as he said the words, he knew they were hollow. His thoughts kept drifting back to Harper, the baby, the tired lines around her eyes, and the unspoken stories hidden behind her composed exterior. He couldn't help but wonder, how had she ended up here? And why did seeing her now, after all these years, feel like a second chance he hadn't asked for but desperately needed? Dinner stretched on, but Lincoln barely registered the conversation. Ruth talked about their upcoming trip to the Maldives and the latest art installation she wanted for their penthouse. But Lincoln's mind was elsewhere. Across the room, Harper moved between tables, her smile polite but distant. He couldn't shake the image of her standing in their old apartment, telling him she couldn't do it anymore, that his work would always come first. The evening ended with dessert, Ruth's favorite crème brûlée, But by the time they left the restaurant, Lincoln's celebration felt hollow. As they stepped into the cool night air, Ruth slipped her arm through his, smiling up at him. "That was perfect." "Thank you." Lincoln nodded absently, his gaze flicking back toward the restaurant's glowing entrance. Inside, Harper was somewhere, going about her night, unaware of the storm she had stirred within him. As the car pulled away, Lincoln leaned back in his seat, staring out at the city lights. The life he had built felt solid, unshakable. Yet tonight, for the first time in years, he felt the faintest cracks forming in its foundation. And in those cracks he saw Harper, tired but resilient, pregnant and strong, reminding him of everything he had once had, and everything he might have lost. The city blurred past the limousine window, streaks of light and shadow painting the glass. Lincoln sat in silence, his fingers tapping an absent rhythm on the armrest. Ruth scrolled through her phone beside him, humming softly to herself. The air inside the car felt thick, the celebratory mood that had started the evening now a distant memory. "You're quiet," Ruth said suddenly, breaking the silence. She looked up from her screen, her brow furrowing as she studied him. "Is something bothering you? You've been off since dinner." Lincoln hesitated, caught off guard. "No, just tired, I think. It's been a big week." Ruth didn't look convinced, her gaze lingering on him a moment longer. "Well, try to relax. We're going to the Maldives in a few days. You deserve a break after everything you've accomplished." He forced a smile and nodded, but his thoughts were miles away, back in that restaurant. More specifically, back with Harper. Her face, her presence, her pregnancy, they churned in his mind like a storm he couldn't escape. The weight of the encounter lingered, pulling him into memories he hadn't revisited in years. Lincoln hadn't always been the man he was now. There was a time when ambition wasn't the singular focus of his life, when late nights at the office and early mornings on conference calls didn't define his existence. Harper had been there during those early years, long before he had become the CEO of Davis Industries, back when they were both dreaming about a future that felt limitless. They had met at a small marketing firm where Harper had been a rising star, her creativity and charisma lighting up every room she entered. Lincoln had been drawn to her immediately, her passion, her laugh, the way she could make even the dullest meetings feel electric. Their connection had been undeniable, and it wasn't long before they were inseparable. In the beginning, everything had felt easy. They were partners in every sense of the word, building their lives together with a shared sense of purpose. Harper had supported Lincoln's aspirations, even when his work began to take up more of his time. She believed in him, in his vision, and he had promised her that all the sacrifices they were making would be worth it. But as Davis Industries grew, so did the distance between them. Lincoln threw himself into his work with a single-minded determination, convinced that success would justify everything, the late nights, the missed dinners, the vacations they never took. Harper, meanwhile, had started to crave something different. She talked about wanting a life that felt meaningful in ways money couldn't buy. She wanted stability, connection, a family. Lincoln could still remember the night it all came to a head. They had been sitting in their apartment, the skyline twinkling outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, when Harper told him she couldn't keep living like this. Her voice had been steady, but her eyes brimmed with tears. "I don't need the penthouse or the trips or the endless work dinners," she had said. "I just need you." "But you're not here anymore, Lincoln." "Not really." He had tried to argue, to explain that everything he was doing was for them, but Harper had only shaken her head, her expression full of a sadness he hadn't known how to fix. A week later she had moved out. Lincoln had told himself it was for the best. They wanted different things, and it was better to let her go than keep holding her back. But sitting in the car now, with Ruth beside him and Harper's face fresh in his mind, he couldn't help but question that narrative. Had it really been for the best? Or had he simply been too consumed by his ambition to fight for the woman he loved? The car pulled to a stop in front of Ruth's building, snapping Lincoln out of his thoughts. She turned to him, her smile bright but expectant. "Are you coming up?" Lincoln hesitated, then shook his head. "I've got some work to finish up tonight." Rain check? Ruth's smile faltered, but she nodded, leaning in to kiss his cheek. Don't work too hard. You're allowed to enjoy your success, you know. He waited until she disappeared into the building before telling the driver to head back to his penthouse. The silence of the car was deafening, and Lincoln's mind kept looping back to Harper, her tired eyes and the undeniable swell of her belly. Who was the father? Was she happy? Was she okay? The questions haunted him all the way home. The next morning, Lincoln sat in his office, a sleek, minimalist space high above the city. He stared at the report on his desk, the words swimming in front of him. For the first time in years, he couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting to Harper, to the way she had looked at him last night, calm, professional, but distant. It was as though she had built a wall between them, and Lincoln wasn't sure he could blame her. Ruth called him around noon, her voice cheerful as she chatted about their trip. He responded in kind, but his heart wasn't in it. She noticed. Are you sure you're okay? She asked. You sound distracted. I'm fine, he said too quickly. Just a lot on my plate right now. There was a pause, then Ruth's voice turned curious. Is this about last night? About that waitress? You seemed weird after she came to the table. Lincoln's grip tightened on the phone. What do you mean? I don't know, Ruth said, her tone light but probing. You just got quiet. And she did seem kind of familiar. Do you know her? He hesitated, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. She's someone I used to know. A long time ago. Ruth didn't push, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Lincoln could feel it in her voice, in the way she lingered before saying goodbye. He ended the call and leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The memories kept coming, unbidden and relentless. He saw Harper on their wedding day, radiant and full of hope. He saw her curled up on their couch, a book in her lap, laughing at something he had said. He saw her walking away from him, her shoulders straight but her steps heavy. And now he had seen her again, carrying a new life and wearing the exhaustion of someone who had been through more than he could imagine. The questions in his mind only grew louder, more insistent. He couldn't ignore them, couldn't push them aside like he had so many other things. For the first time in years, Lincoln felt a pull toward the past, a need to understand what had gone wrong, and whether it was too late to make things right. Lincoln's thoughts swirled endlessly in the days following the dinner at Amaretto. He found himself replaying every detail, every expression on Harper's face. The calm way she had handled herself, the flicker of something, pain maybe, when their eyes met. Most of all, he couldn't stop thinking about her pregnancy. The questions were like a persistent hum in the back of his mind, growing louder the more he tried to push them aside. At work, Lincoln struggled to concentrate. Meetings felt like background noise, and even the congratulatory messages about the product launch failed to bring him any real satisfaction. His assistant, Claire, noticed his distraction but didn't comment, instead keeping her usual efficiency intact. Lincoln appreciated her professionalism but knew he wasn't fooling anyone. By the end of the week, the weight of his thoughts was too much to bear. He needed answers. He started with a simple call to an old mutual friend, Lily, who had remained close to Harper after the divorce. Lincoln hadn't spoken to her in years, their conversations having dwindled after his and Harper's separation. Still, when he reached out, Lily didn't sound surprised. I was wondering when I'd hear from you, she said, her tone both amused and cautious. Lincoln hesitated. Did she mention seeing me? No, Lily said slowly. But I know she's been working at Amaretto. You must have run into her. I did, Lincoln admitted. He hesitated again before asking. She's pregnant. Is she okay? There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Lincoln could picture Lily weighing her words carefully. She's fine, she said finally. But it hasn't been easy for her. Harper left her job a while ago to start her own interior design business. Things were going well at first, but you know how unpredictable that kind of work can be. She ended up taking the job at Amaretto to make ends meet. Lincoln felt a pang of guilt. Harper had always been ambitious, but her ambitions had been different from his. While he chased financial success and prestige, she had sought fulfillment and creativity. Hearing that she had struggled brought back a wave of memories he wasn't ready for. "And the baby?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "It's hers," Lily said, her tone softening. "The father isn't in the picture. She's planning to raise the baby on her own." The words hit Lincoln harder than he expected. He tried to imagine Harper navigating pregnancy alone while working long hours and managing everything else. The image made his chest tighten. "She never reached out," Lincoln said, almost to himself. "She wouldn't," Lily replied. "Harper's not the type to ask for help, especially from you. She's proud, Lincoln. And after everything that happened between you two, well, she's moved on. Or at least, she's trying to." The conversation ended shortly after, but Lily's words lingered. Lincoln couldn't shake the guilt that followed him everywhere. Guilt for the way their marriage had ended, for the choices he had made, and now for the life Harper was living without him. At home, Lincoln tried to distract himself with work, but his focus kept slipping. Ruth noticed. She had been patient for the first few days, chalking up his distance to post-launch stress, but her frustration finally boiled over during dinner at his penthouse. "You're barely listening to me," Ruth said, setting her wine glass down with a little too much force. "I've been talking about our trip for 10 minutes, and you haven't said a word." Lincoln looked up, startled. "I'm sorry. My mind's just been elsewhere." "Yeah, I've noticed," Ruth said, her voice sharp. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "This is about her, isn't it? The waitress. Harper." Lincoln tensed. "Ruth, it's not what you think." "Oh, isn't it?" she snapped. "Because ever since that night, you've been distracted, distant." "I'm not stupid, Lincoln. I can tell when something, or someone, is taking up space in your head." Lincoln rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the weight of the conversation pressing down on him. "It's complicated." "That's not an answer," Ruth shot back. "Are you still in love with her?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken for far too long. Lincoln didn't know how to respond. Was he still in love with Harper? He wasn't sure if love was the right word for what he was feeling, but the emotions stirred up by seeing her again were undeniable. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice quiet. Ruth let out a bitter laugh. "At least you're honest." She stood, grabbing her purse and slinging it over her shoulder. "You need to figure out what you want, Lincoln. And until you do, don't call me." With that, she walked out, leaving Lincoln alone in the silence of his penthouse. He stared at the door for a long time, the echo of her words replaying in his mind. He should have felt angry, or at least defensive, but all he felt was exhaustion. Ruth wasn't wrong. He did need to figure out what he wanted. The problem was, he wasn't sure if he could. The next day, Lincoln found himself scrolling through his phone, looking at pictures from the early days of his relationship with Harper. There was one from their first trip together, her smile bright and carefree as they stood on a windy cliffside. Another from a holiday party, her cheeks flushed from the cold as she laughed at something just out of frame. Each photo brought back a flood of memories, both good and bad, and Lincoln couldn't help but wonder how things had gone so wrong. He thought about what Lily had said, about Harper's pride and her determination to handle things on her own. It was one of the things he had always admired about her, but now it felt like a barrier he didn't know how to break through. He wanted to help, to be there for her in some way, but he wasn't sure if she would even let him. Lincoln spent the rest of the weekend in a haze, torn between the life he had built and the one he had left behind. The questions about Harper, about her pregnancy, and about his own feelings refused to leave him alone. By Sunday night, he made a decision. He couldn't keep living in this limbo, stuck between the past and the present. If he wanted answers, if he wanted any chance at closure, or maybe something more, he needed to talk to Harper. Directly. No more speculation, no more second-hand information. Just the truth, whatever it might be. As he sat in his office the next morning, Lincoln picked up his phone and stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, taking a deep breath, he dialed the number for Amaretto. "Good afternoon," the hostess answered. "How can I help you?" "I'd like to speak to Harper," Lincoln said, his voice steady despite the nerves twisting in his stomach. "Harper Whitmore." There was a pause. "I'm sorry, but we don't typically interrupt our staff during shifts. Can I take a message?" Lincoln hesitated, then said, "Tell her it's Lincoln. Lincoln Davis. And that I'd like to see her." The hostess promised to pass the message along, and as Lincoln hung up, he felt the first flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. It was tentative, fragile, but it was there. And for the first time in a long time, he was ready to follow it. The hum of the city filled the air as Lincoln stepped out of the car in front of Amaretto, his tailored suit brushing against the cool evening breeze. It was the same restaurant, the same glowing sign, but this time he was alone. His excuse for returning was thin, some fabricated business meeting he'd casually mentioned to Claire. But the truth was, he had no meeting. He just couldn't shake the need to see Harper again. Inside, the atmosphere was just as he remembered it, elegant and alive with soft murmurs of conversation and the clink of silverware. He spotted her almost immediately, moving between tables with a practiced ease, her black blouse and apron blending into the dimly lit backdrop of polished wood and white tablecloths. Lincoln sat at a small corner table, deliberately choosing a spot where he wouldn't be immediately noticeable. When Harper finally approached, her expression shifted from neutral professionalism to something guarded, her movements slowing as she came to stand beside him. "Lincoln," she said evenly, her tone carefully devoid of emotion. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." He glanced at the empty seat across from him, then back at her. "I was hoping we could talk." Her lips pressed into a thin line, her hesitation clear. "I'm working." "I know," he said quickly, lowering his voice. "But just a few minutes. Please." Harper's eyes flicked around the room, scanning for her manager or another server who might intervene. She sighed softly, setting her tray on the edge of the table. "Fine. But make it quick." Lincoln gestured to the seat across from him, but Harper shook her head. "I can't sit." "What do you want?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice even further. "I wanted to see how you're doing. After everything. I know I don't have the right to ask, but I just needed to know." Harper crossed her arms, her posture rigid. "Why now, Lincoln? It's been years. You've moved on. So have I." "I saw you, Harper," he said, his voice quieter but no less intense. "That night. You were pregnant, working here, and I can't stop thinking about it. I need to understand." Her eyes softened for just a moment before she caught herself, her professional mask slipping back into place. "I'm fine. I don't need your pity." "It's not pity," he said firmly. "It's concern. I'm not trying to make this harder for you, I swear. But you looked tired. Stressed. And if there's any way I can help. She cut him off, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. "Lincoln, I don't need you swooping in to save me. I've been managing just fine without you." "I know you have," he said gently. "But you don't have to do everything alone." Harper's jaw tightened, but she didn't immediately reply. Instead, she glanced toward the kitchen, her body tense as though she were debating whether to walk away. Finally, she exhaled, her shoulders sagging ever so slightly. "Fine. 10 minutes. Meet me out back when I finish my shift." Lincoln nodded, his chest tightening with relief. He watched as she walked away, her posture straight and her pace brisk, and he wondered if he had just pushed too far. The alley behind the restaurant was quieter than Lincoln had expected, the muffled sounds of the city fading into the background. Harper emerged a few minutes later, her apron gone and her hair falling loose around her shoulders. She looked different in the soft glow of the streetlights, less guarded, more herself. For a moment, Lincoln was transported back to a time when seeing her like this was a daily occurrence. She leaned against the brick wall, crossing her arms as she faced him. "Talk." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I heard about the interior design business." From Lily. Harper's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't interrupt. I also heard that it's been challenging, he continued, and that you're doing all of this on your own. I can't imagine how hard that must be. It's not easy, she admitted after a moment, her voice softer now. But it's mine. After the divorce, I needed something that felt like mine. So, I left the corporate world and started taking on small projects. Word spread, and for a while it was great. But then the market shifted, and clients started drying up. She glanced down, her fingers brushing against her stomach in an unconscious gesture. When I found out I was pregnant, I had to pick up shifts here to cover the bills. It's not glamorous, but it pays. Lincoln's gaze dropped to her hand, resting protectively over her belly. And the baby's father? Harper's lips pressed into a tight line. He's not in the picture. It wasn't serious, and when I told him, he made it clear he didn't want to be involved. So, it's just me. The words hit Lincoln harder than he expected. Harper had always been strong, but the thought of her facing something as monumental as single parenthood alone made his chest ache. You shouldn't have to do this by yourself, he said quietly. Harper, I know I messed up. I know I let you down, and I can't undo that. But if there's anything I can do now, anything at all, I want to help. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Why, Lincoln? Why do you care all of a sudden? Because I never stopped caring, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I just didn't know how to show it. And now, I don't want to make the same mistakes again. Harper's eyes softened, and for the first time that evening, she let her guard drop completely. I don't know if I can trust you, Lincoln. Not after everything. You don't have to decide that now, he said quickly. But let me help, even if it's just as a friend. I can connect you with people who can grow your business. Make sure you don't have to rely on this place to get by. No strings attached. She hesitated, her hand still resting protectively over her stomach. Finally, she nodded, just once. Okay. But only because it's for the baby. Lincoln smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that he hadn't felt in years. For the baby. As they stood there, the city's quiet hum surrounding them, Lincoln felt something shift. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally moving in the right direction. Lincoln couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with Harper. Her words echoed in his mind as he sat in his penthouse that night, the city's lights twinkling outside the massive windows. The place felt colder than usual, the silence almost oppressive. For years he had measured his worth by the size of his accomplishments, the deals closed, the markets conquered, the wealth accumulated. But sitting there, surrounded by all the trappings of his success, he felt strangely hollow. Harper had always valued the things he had neglected: family, connection, balance. Back then, he had dismissed her priorities as naive, believing that success required sacrifice. Now, he wasn't so sure. The image of her standing in that alley, tired but unbroken, stayed with him. She was fighting for something bigger than herself, something real. And what was he fighting for? Another zero on his bank balance? Another headline in the business section? For the first time in years, Lincoln began to wonder if he'd been chasing the wrong things all along. The next morning, his routine felt off. His usual coffee tasted bitter, his meetings dragged on longer than they should have, and even the congratulatory messages from his board about the product launch felt hollow. His assistant, Claire, noticed. You okay, Mr. Davis? She asked cautiously as she placed a file on his desk. You've been distracted lately. Lincoln looked up, startled by the observation. I'm fine, Claire. Just a lot on my mind. She hesitated before nodding and leaving the room, but her expression made it clear she didn't believe him. Lincoln didn't blame her. He didn't believe himself either. That evening, Ruth showed up unannounced at his penthouse, her stilettos clicking against the marble floor as she walked in. She was dressed impeccably, as always, her makeup flawless, her smile bright. But there was an edge to her voice as she greeted him. I've been giving you space, she began, her tone casual but calculated. But I think it's time we talked. Lincoln set his glass of whiskey down on the coffee table, bracing himself. About what? About whatever's going on with you, Ruth said, sitting gracefully on the couch across from him. You've been distant, distracted. And I think I know why. He stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. It's Harper, isn't it? She said, her eyes narrowing. Ever since that night at the restaurant, you've been acting differently. Don't try to deny it. Lincoln sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm not going to deny it. I saw her, and it brought back a lot. She's going through a tough time, and I want to help. Ruth's laugh was sharp and cold. Help? Lincoln, she's your ex-wife. Whatever she's going through is not your responsibility. You're with me now. I know that, he said, his voice steady but firm. But I can't just ignore it. She's someone I cared about, someone I still care about in some way. Ruth's expression darkened. So what? You're going to play savior? Throw money at her and feel better about yourself? It's not about money, he said, standing now, his frustration bubbling to the surface. It's about doing the right thing. Something I didn't do enough of when we were together. Ruth rose to her feet as well, her heels bringing her almost level with him. And what about us, Lincoln? Are you just going to throw this away because your ex suddenly reappeared? Lincoln met her gaze, the weight of the moment settling over him. I don't think this has been working for a while, Ruth. We've been going through the motions, but there's no real connection. Not like there should be. Her face froze, her carefully composed mask cracking for just a moment before she recovered. I see, she said, her voice icy. So that's it then? He nodded, his heart heavy but certain. I think it's best for both of us. Ruth grabbed her purse, her movements sharp and deliberate. You'll regret this, she said as she walked toward the door. You always do. The door slammed behind her, leaving Lincoln alone in the vast, empty space of his penthouse. He exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest easing even as a pang of guilt settled in. He didn't regret his decision, but that didn't make it any easier. Over the next few weeks, Lincoln found himself focusing more on Harper and less on the demands of his company. He reached out to a few trusted contacts in the design industry, discreetly putting in good words for her and sending potential clients her way. He also arranged for her to meet with a financial advisor, ensuring her business had the support it needed to thrive. He didn't tell Harper about any of it. She was proud, and he knew she wouldn't accept the help if she thought it was charity. Instead, he let the opportunities come to her organically, hoping she would seize them without suspicion. Their interactions at the restaurant became more frequent but remained brief. Harper was polite but guarded, her walls firmly in place. Lincoln respected her boundaries, but he also made it clear that he was there for her if she ever needed anything. One evening, as they sat in the back alley after her shift, Harper finally broke the silence. I don't know why you're doing all this, Lincoln. Helping me, I mean. You don't owe me anything. He looked at her, his expression earnest. I'm not doing it because I owe you. I'm doing it because I care. And because I want to. She studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for any sign of ulterior motives. Finally, she nodded, a small, hesitant smile playing on her lips. Thank you? Lincoln felt a warmth spread through him, the kind he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about helping Harper, it was about rebuilding something he had lost a long time ago. Trust. Connection. Meaning. As the weeks turned into months, Harper's business began to pick up, and her stress seemed to ease. She still worked at the restaurant part-time, but her focus shifted back to her passion, and Lincoln could see the difference it made. She looked lighter, happier, even as her pregnancy progressed. Lincoln didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Helping Harper wasn't just about making up for the past, it was about building something better, something real. And he was ready to see where it would take them. Lincoln stepped into the cozy boutique, the scent of fresh paint and polished wood greeting him as he crossed the threshold. The space was alive with color, fabric swatches draped over chairs, mood boards pinned to walls, and plants tucked into every corner. Harper's new design studio was small but brimming with personality, just like her. "Hey," she greeted him, glancing up from her desk where she was arranging tile samples. Her smile was cautious but genuine, a far cry from the guarded expression she'd worn when they first reconnected. "What brings you by?" "I was in the neighborhood," Lincoln replied, his tone casual, though he'd made the detour specifically to check in. "Wanted to see how things are going." She nodded, gesturing for him to sit. "Busy, which is a good problem to have. The new clients you mentioned came through, and they've been keeping me on my toes." Lincoln settled into a chair, glancing around the room. "It's amazing to see this place come together. I knew you'd make it work." Harper tilted her head, a hint of skepticism in her smile. "I'm still figuring things out. It's not exactly smooth sailing, but it's mine, and that makes it worth it." He admired her resilience, the quiet determination that had always been her strength. "If there's anything else you need, don't hesitate to ask." "I mean it." "I know," she said softly, meeting his gaze. "And I appreciate it. I really do." Their conversations had grown easier over the weeks, the walls between them gradually coming down. Lincoln had taken care to tread lightly, respecting her independence while finding small ways to support her. He never pushed, never asked for more than she was willing to give, and that patience seemed to be paying off. They began spending more time together, not intentionally at first but in the natural rhythm of their shared connections. He'd stop by the studio occasionally, offering feedback on her projects, or just lending an ear when she needed to vent. Sometimes they'd grab a quick coffee, their conversations light and easy, filled with moments of laughter that reminded them both of simpler times. One evening, as they walked through a nearby park after closing up her studio, Lincoln broke the comfortable silence. "I've been thinking a lot about the past." Harper glanced at him, her expression curious but wary. "What about it?" "About us. About the ways I let you down," he admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "I was so focused on building my career that I lost sight of what really mattered. I took you for granted, and I'm sorry." She slowed her steps, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. "You don't have to apologize, Lincoln. We both made mistakes." "I know," he said, stopping to face her. "But I should have listened to you more. You wanted something real, something I couldn't see at the time. I realize now how much I missed because I was too stubborn to stop and appreciate what we had." Harper looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "People change," she said finally, her tone thoughtful. "And I think you've changed too." Her words were simple, but they held a weight that struck Lincoln deeply. He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'm trying. And I want you to know that whatever happens, I'm here for you. For you and the baby." Harper's lips quirked into a smile, softer this time. "Thank you, Lincoln. That means a lot." As they continued walking, their conversation shifted to lighter topics, but the exchange stayed with both of them, a subtle but significant step forward. Inspired by Harper's passion for helping local artisans and small businesses, Lincoln began exploring ways he could use his own influence to make a difference. He reached out to his contacts in the city, proposing a series of initiatives aimed at supporting grassroots entrepreneurship. His company launched a grant program for emerging designers and hosted community events that showcased local talent. Harper was hesitant at first when he mentioned the projects to her, wary of being a focus of his efforts. "This isn't about me, is it?" she asked one evening as they sat in her studio, reviewing a proposal he'd drafted. "It's inspired by you," he clarified. "But it's not just about you. There's so much potential in this community, and I want to help foster that. You reminded me how important it is to invest in people, not just profits." She studied him for a long moment, her expression softening. "That's really amazing, Lincoln. I'm proud of you." The words hit him harder than he expected, filling him with a quiet warmth. He hadn't realized how much her opinion still mattered to him until now. "Thank you," he said simply. As the months passed, Harper's trust in Lincoln grew, and with it, a new kind of friendship blossomed between them. It wasn't the heady, all-consuming connection they'd shared in their early years, but something steadier, built on mutual respect and understanding. Lincoln cherished it, knowing how fragile it was and determined not to squander it. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in her studio, he helping to move furniture while she arranged a new display, Harper paused and looked at him. "You've really changed," she said, her tone a mix of surprise and admiration. Lincoln set down the chair he'd been carrying, brushing his hands off. "I had to. Losing you was a wake-up call I didn't know I needed." Harper smiled, a warmth in her expression that hadn't been there before. "Maybe some good came out of it after all." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to quiet around them. It wasn't a declaration, wasn't even a promise, but it was something, an acknowledgement of the progress they'd made and the possibilities that lay ahead. As they returned to their tasks, the air between them felt lighter, the bridge they'd been building growing stronger with every step they took together. Neither of them knew what the future held, but for the first time in years, they both felt ready to face it, side by side. It was an ordinary afternoon when Lincoln's phone buzzed on his desk. He glanced at the screen, expecting another message from his assistant or a client, but instead, it was a call from an unfamiliar number. Something about it made his chest tighten. "Hello?" he answered, his voice cautious. "Lincoln, it's Lily," came the hurried reply. "Harper's been taken to the hospital. She went into labor early. She's asking for you." Lincoln's breath caught. "Is she okay? What happened?" "She's stable, but they're monitoring her closely. The baby's coming sooner than expected, and she's scared." She didn't know who else to call. Lincoln was already on his feet, grabbing his keys and heading for the door. "Which hospital?" Lily told him, and he didn't waste another second. He called for his driver but couldn't wait, opting to drive himself. The city blurred past him, his focus narrowing to a single thought: Harper. When he arrived at the hospital, the antiseptic smell and muted chaos hit him all at once. He approached the front desk, his heart pounding in his chest. "Harper Whitmore," he said, his voice strained. "Where is she?" The nurse directed him to the maternity ward, and he rushed down the sterile hallway, his polished shoes echoing off the floor. When he reached her room, he paused for a moment to collect himself before stepping inside. Harper was lying in the hospital bed, her face pale and damp with sweat. Her hair was a mess, sticking to her forehead, but her eyes were sharp, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She looked up when he entered, and relief softened her expression. "You came," she said, her voice weak but steady. "Of course I did," he said, crossing the room to stand by her side. "I'm here." She reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly as another contraction gripped her. Lincoln felt a pang of helplessness watching her endure the pain, her body trembling with the effort. "The baby's early," she said once the contraction passed, her voice trembling. "They said it's not ideal, but we'll be okay, right?" "You will be," Lincoln said, his voice firm. "You're the strongest person I know, Harper. You've got this." Her lips quirked into a faint smile, but her grip on his hand didn't loosen. For the first time, Lincoln saw her vulnerability laid bare, and it shook something loose in him. She wasn't just the woman he had once loved, she was a fighter, a survivor, and now, a soon-to-be mother. The hours dragged on, each contraction bringing Harper closer to delivery. Lincoln stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, and silently marveling at her strength. Nurses came and went, offering updates and adjusting monitors, but Lincoln barely noticed them. His entire world had shrunk to the woman in the bed and the life they were about to bring into the world. When the time finally came, the room transformed into a flurry of activity. Doctors and nurses worked quickly, their movements precise and efficient. Lincoln stood by Harper's side, his hand clasping hers as she pushed through the pain, her cries tearing through the sterile air. "You're doing amazing," he told her, his voice steady despite the whirlwind around them. "I'm right here." Harper didn't let go of his hand, even as her grip tightened to the point of pain. Lincoln welcomed it, wanting to share even a fraction of the burden she was carrying. Watching her fight for their baby, her baby, Lincoln felt something deep inside him shift. When the baby's first cry filled the room, time seemed to stop. The doctor held up a tiny, wriggling form, announcing, "It's a boy." Harper collapsed back against the bed, her face etched with exhaustion and relief. Lincoln glanced at her, his heart swelling with pride and something far deeper. When the nurse placed the baby in her arms, tears streamed down Harper's cheeks as she gazed at her son for the first time. "He's perfect," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Lincoln leaned over, his gaze fixed on the tiny bundle in her arms. The baby's face was scrunched up, his cries softening into whimpers as Harper held him close. "He is," Lincoln agreed, his throat tight. For a while, they simply existed in the moment, the chaos of the delivery room fading into the background. When the nurses finally took the baby to clean and swaddle him, Lincoln pulled a chair closer to Harper's bed, his hand resting lightly on hers. "You were incredible," he said softly. "I've never seen anything like that." Harper let out a tired laugh, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment. "I didn't think I could do it. Not without you." Her words hung in the air, filling Lincoln with a mix of gratitude and longing. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "Harper," he began, his voice low, "there's something I need to say." She opened her eyes, her gaze meeting his. "What is it?" He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Seeing you like this, watching you bring a new life into the world, it's made me realize how much I've been missing. You're incredible, Harper. You've always been incredible. And I think I've always loved you." Her eyes widened slightly, her lips parting in surprise. "I know I don't deserve another chance," he went on, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want you to know that I'm here. For you, for the baby, for whatever you need. I'll be whatever you want me to be, friend, co-parent, anything. The choice is yours." Harper stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Lincoln feared he'd said too much, that he'd pushed her away. But then her hand tightened around his, and a faint smile curved her lips. "Lincoln," she said softly, "you've changed. I can see it. And I think we can figure this out. Together." Relief and hope surged through him, his chest tightening with the weight of her words. He nodded, unable to speak, and simply held her hand as they sat in silence. The nurse returned with the baby, placing him gently in Harper's arms. Lincoln leaned closer, gazing at the tiny face that represented a new beginning, a second chance for all of them. In that moment, he knew he'd do whatever it took to be the man they both deserved. The next few weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and quiet moments filled with new life. Lincoln visited Harper and the baby, whom she named Henry, almost every day. He marveled at how quickly the tiny boy became the center of their world, how easily his presence made the cracks in their past feel smaller, more distant. Every coo, every stretch of his little arms seemed to stitch them together in ways Lincoln hadn't thought possible. Harper, too, seemed to be softening. Her initial wariness around Lincoln gave way to something gentler, more trusting. They had shared some difficult conversations since that night in the hospital, conversations that forced them to confront the mistakes of their past. But in every exchange, Lincoln saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes, a cautious willingness to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Lincoln sat on Harper's couch with Henry cradled in his arms. The baby had just fallen asleep, his tiny hand curled around Lincoln's finger, and the sight of him filled Lincoln with a quiet sense of awe. "You're a natural," Harper said softly, sitting down beside him with a cup of tea. Lincoln glanced at her, his expression warm. "I had a good teacher." She smiled, her eyes lingering on him for a moment longer than usual. "Thank you for being here. For everything." "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "This is where I want to be." Harper looked down at her tea, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. "I've been thinking a lot about us," she admitted. About the things we went through and the people we've become. And? Lincoln asked, his voice steady but tinged with anticipation. She met his gaze, her expression earnest. I see how much you've changed, Lincoln. You've become someone who listens, who cares about more than just work. I think I want to see where this can go. If we can build something new. Lincoln's heart swelled with relief and joy, but he kept his response measured, not wanting to overwhelm her. I'd like that. More than anything. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of their shared history giving way to the possibilities of the future. Over the following months, Lincoln began to make changes in his life. He had spent years pouring every ounce of himself into Davis Industries, convinced that his worth was tied to his success. But now, with Henry's tiny fingers gripping his heart and Harper's cautious smiles filling his days, he saw things differently. At a board meeting one morning, Lincoln announced his decision to step back from the day-to-day operations of the company. He named his most trusted lieutenant as interim CEO, explaining that he wanted to focus on his personal life and pursue projects that aligned with his newfound values. His colleagues were stunned, but Lincoln felt nothing but clarity. For the first time in years, he wasn't running on autopilot. He was choosing to live intentionally, to prioritize what truly mattered. Lincoln's transition wasn't just professional, it was personal, too. He moved out of his sprawling penthouse and into a more modest home near Harper's neighborhood, making it easier to spend time with her and Henry. His days became filled with small joys, late-night feedings, afternoons in the park, and quiet evenings sharing stories with Harper while Henry dozed between them. Harper, in turn, began to trust him more deeply. She saw how committed he was, not just to Henry but to their fragile, growing relationship. They weren't rushing anything. They were rebuilding step by step, brick by careful brick. One crisp autumn afternoon, they hosted a small gathering at Harper's home to celebrate Henry's first 3 months. It wasn't extravagant, just a few close friends, a simple spread of food, and plenty of laughter filling the cozy space. Lily was there, of course, along with a few of Harper's clients who had become friends. Lincoln's assistant, Claire, even stopped by, bringing a handmade blanket for Henry that earned her a rare, genuine smile from Harper. Lincoln stood in the corner of the living room, watching the scene unfold. Harper was laughing with Lily near the kitchen, her face lit with happiness. Henry was being fussed over by Claire and one of Harper's clients, his tiny hands waving in the air. The room felt alive with warmth and love, and Lincoln realized he hadn't felt this content in years. Harper caught his eye across the room and smiled, a soft, knowing look that sent warmth flooding through him. He crossed the room to stand beside her, leaning against the counter as she finished her conversation with Lily. "This is nice," he said, his voice low. "It is," Harper agreed, glancing around the room. "It feels right." Lincoln nodded, his gaze settling on her. "Thank you for letting me be part of this. Of your life again." Harper turned to him fully, her expression serious but tender. "You've earned it, Lincoln. You've shown me that you're not the same man you were before. And I'm glad you're here." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of forgiveness, of hope. Lincoln reached for her hand, his touch light but firm. "I'll keep earning it every day." She squeezed his hand, her smile widening. "I know you will." As the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, Lincoln found himself alone in the living room, cradling a drowsy Henry. Harper appeared beside him, her presence warm and steady. "Looks like someone's ready for bed," she said, brushing a hand over Henry's soft hair. "Yeah," Lincoln replied, his voice soft. "He had a big day." Harper sat beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder. They stayed like that for a while, the room quiet except for Henry's soft breaths. "I think we're going to be okay," Harper murmured, her voice filled with quiet conviction. Lincoln turned his head to kiss the top of her hair, his heart full. "I know we are." And in that moment, surrounded by love and second chances, Lincoln knew he had finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Not success, not wealth, but a life filled with purpose, connection, and the people who mattered most. Lincoln's journey wasn't just about rekindling a lost love, it was about rediscovering what truly mattered. Through forgiveness, growth, and the courage to take a leap of faith, he and Harper found their way back to each other, not as the people they once were, but as stronger, wiser versions of themselves. Together, they built a life defined not by material success but by love, family, and the promise of second chances. As their story reminds us, it's never too late to change, to make amends, and to prioritize what truly matters. Whether it's repairing a relationship, chasing a dream, or simply being present for the people we care about, every step forward is an opportunity to create a new beginning.